what's the big question there, right? The big question about Peter is like Peter thinks he's wanted, and yet Christ is unfaithful. And Jesus walks him back through memories of his initial calling and of his failure to restore him back to those things. And I found in my own life, and I know for our lives, like Jesus will often walk you back through earlier parts of your story. Maybe you just want to move on from, get away from, just kind of scratch out whatever, but Jesus cares about your whole story.
Well, Joshua, welcome to this special series. Welcome to the Wider Lens that we're doing for Awesome Marriage. I'm excited to have you on this, excited about these Fridays that we're going to do for 4 weeks and for you being a part of that. And it's just good to reconnect. It's been a couple of years, I guess. It doesn't seem like it, but I guess it probably has. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kimberling. Man, I so loved our conversation last time, and I was really looking forward to this one again, getting to dive in together.
I felt the same way, exactly the same way. So let's kind of talk about the new book, How God Is For You When All Seems Against You, Rich Lessons from the Life of Jesus. Why did you feel this book was something that you needed to write? I think we all feel like when we start writing, okay, there's something behind that, so that motivates us. Otherwise, we'd probably just stare at a blank screen and wouldn't get anything on there. So, what was the motivation? What kind of got you to do this one?
Definitely, man. Well, honestly, the motivation was I probably went through like the most brutal year of my life. I went through a year that was pretty rough a few years back, and it was, I mean, long story, I go into some of it in the book, but was part of a large church. It was one church with 10 congregations, and through a variety of reasons, it ended up imploding. I was one of the leaders, one pastor amongst many there, and it was led to just sort of a loss of job, stability, community for our family. You know, there was just a lot of just wounds there that we kind of navigated and walked through, and then when it came even to the future, sense of vocation and calling and God, what's next? There were some dreams for the future of things that I sensed God had called to that kind of fell apart, and it left me even in a bit of a dark night of the soul going, God, do I even know your voice? Like, how do I make sense of this? And even to the point of, for the first time in my life, had some suicidal thoughts at a point, and just seeing symptoms in my body and with tremors and different things, just going, man, what in the world here? And God, are you for me? You know? And I found myself going back to maybe my favorite book of the Bible over the years has been the Gospel of John. And oh my goodness, God just began through a variety of things. We really began ministering to me in some deep and powerful ways. And so that was why I read the book, you know, God is on your side. It's the title, God is on your side, how Jesus is for you when everything seems against you. I found myself in this season of both, like, I know so many people that are in the same spot at times of like these seasons of life hit where you can find yourself going, God, are you actually on my side? Are you actually for me? And part of the theme of the book, you know, even think about that language of God is on your side, how in the opening of John, even from his intro, we see that Jesus is the Word made flesh, meaning he is the creator who enters onto our side of creation to be with us forever. He is the Lamb once slain, meaning he is the innocent one who steps onto our side as the guilty on the cross to fight for us. And also describes him as this ladder connecting heaven and earth at the end of John 1, that he is bringing his side of heaven onto our side of earth in us and through us as the ascended victorious King. And so going to man, John gives us this picture right out of the gate of the God who's on our side. He's entering onto our side of creation and in our mess and brokenness and sin and all, and even like bringing redemption in us and through us through the Spirit today. And that, man, I just found myself in a season of really receiving from the goodness of God and re-encountering the gospel again in just a fresh way. And so, this felt like, man, this is the book I've needed. This is the book I needed in that brutal year, you know, just to come back to the beauty and glory of the gospel.
Yeah, that is so good. And I think it's interesting, just some other books I've read the last couple of years and people I've listened to, of how many people kind of have gone through that darkness, whether it's your situation, whether it was burnout, whatever it is. And I think in ministry, we don't think we're ever going to get there. I mean, it's like, I'm on fire. I am serving the Lord, and now I don't know if he likes me, or,
Yes.
and so and then I think that's just a dark place. And I've heard other people say the same thing. I had suicidal thoughts. I never thought I'd have something like that. So, yeah, I think it's something that's a lot of us go through. I've been through depression twice, and it's not fun. It's not fun. But I
Yes.
also see that God, even though I didn't always know He was there in the midst of it, He was, and you begin to see it on the other side of it. And
Yes.
but it seems like that even as believers, so many people, or so often, we resist receiving that help from Jesus, when, like you said, it's so clear in the Bible that he offers it freely. Why do we have trouble grabbing hold of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I know in my own life, one of the things that I kind of learned about myself through this last season was how much I was under the assumption that my belonging was dependent upon my performance, what I had to contribute, So realizing, man, I had some of my patterns. Part of this comes out of my own story and backdrop and childhood, different things, but realizing that even at a young age, there was a sense of like not feeling like I belonged, whether feeling a bit scared at home and rejected at school, and the sense of, okay, I'm going to be the smart kid and the nice kid. It was how it showed up in my life. Like if I'm smart enough and read all the books and get good grades and do that thing, and if I'm nice enough, maybe I won't get picked on at school, and I can keep things calm at home. And then realizing, like, oh my gosh, I got into ministry, and it was the same thing. Like, if I'm smart enough and nice enough, then I belong, And so in my own context and as a pastor, it's like, well, I'm going to be smart enough, read all the books, have the ideas, have the concepts, and I'm going to be really nice. I'm not going to be one of those domineering, mean pastors, but I want to listen and help people and all.
Right.
And I would have always said, that our being comes before doing, right? Like that our being in Christ comes before the stuff that we can do for him. But I didn't realize how ingrained, though, it still was in me that, hey, I'm okay, I belong because I can contribute and bring these things to the table.
Yeah.
And it was in a season of unraveling that God really brought me to a place where I found the Lord going, Josh, before I called you to use you, I called you to love you, And
wow.
Josh, I want to make my home in you, in Christ, through the Spirit, and then still a deeper layer of belonging in you that's not dependent on how much you can do for me or how, but it's just because you're my child, I'm for you, I'm on your side. And when I think of, one story that comes to mind in the gospel is Jesus says, hey, anyone who is thirsty, and he's quoting Isaiah, come all who are thirsty, and I'll give you living water, referring to the Spirit. And it's in John chapter 7. And what strikes me in Jesus saying there is that all you need is need, right? Like there's no requirement to come except that you're thirsty, And sometimes I think that we think in order to come and receive from God, like if I'm going to belong in life with God, then I've got to have something that I'm bringing to the table to contribute. But actually what we have to contribute is need. Or Jesus calls himself the bread of life, and he gives the water of life. And I think part of what that implies is like the only requirement to come is that you're hungry and thirsty. that actually the deepest hunger we have, more than for a protein bar or a meal or a Thanksgiving feast, is for the presence of the living God. And the deepest thirst and I don't know about you, but I can tend to run to all sorts of other things to try and quench that thirst and satisfy that craving. Yeah. So to your question, why do we have a hard time receiving? I think partly it could be because we're running to other things to satiate that, and partly because maybe there's a deep assumption within us, even more than we might consciously realize, that like I can't really come to God with my hunger unless I've got something to contribute that can fix it. So
yeah. No, that makes so much sense. And I think in ministry, it's something we're so susceptible to because, we live in a culture that everybody is rewarded for what they do. And so all of a sudden to just think he just loves me. You mean I don't have to do this or do that? As you were talking, I was thinking it's almost the opposite of the person that doesn't come because they've done these things that they think make them unworthy of coming to Jesus.
Yes.
It's kind of like both ways keep us from receiving what Jesus has for us. One, because we're unworthy, and the other, I guess we feel like we're unworthy, but just for a different reason. Not because we've done all these sins, although we all sin, but because, well, I'm depressed. I can't preach like I did, or I can't write like I did. And so we get in this trap. And just to how do we figure out how to push through that to realize that Jesus says, I just want to love you.
Yeah, I love what you're saying. I think on the one side, one part of the book about like one lie that we can buy into is like, I'm too bad. Like I've done too many horrible wrong things or whatever. Or the other lie is like, I'm not that bad. Like I don't know that I actually do. I can do it with my own strength. And I love the story of Barabbas, where is close to the crucifixion, where Barabbas is a criminal on death row who's it's interesting. John gives us three contrasts with Barabbas. That on the one hand, Jesus is exchanged for Barabbas. That people say, hey, no, we'll set Barabbas free and let Jesus go to the cross. And these three contrasts, one is Jesus is the innocent one exchanged for a rebel. Like Jesus has done nothing wrong. It's a sham trial. But Barabbas is guilty, and he's guilty of insurrection, of violent murder. Like he's done some heinous stuff. I mean, today we think like a terrorist, right? Like he's inflicted violence for this ideology. The second contrast is that he is a my mind is trying to catch up right now. There's three contrasts. The third one is that they're both son of the father. It's just named Barabbas. Barabbas, his name means son of the father. And Bar, son, and Abba, father.
Yeah.
And Jesus, his primary identity in John's gospel is the son of the father. And so you have the three contrasts. There's the innocent one exchanged for the guilty. You have the king, Jesus, the King of Kings, exchanged for a rebel who's committed insurrection. And you have the true son of the Father exchanged for a lost and estranged son of the Father. And if you're Barabbas, like, why would you refuse that pardon? It's obvious. Like, say yes, like receive. Because Barabbas is a picture of all of us. We are the guilty that Jesus has exchanged himself for us as the innocent one. We are the rebels who the King has given his life for. And we are the estranged children of the Father that Jesus, the true son of the Father, has given him his life for. Why would we not receive that pardon? Well, like you said, I think it's either because lie number one, we think, I'm not that bad. The reality is, no, I am. Like, I'm a mess. I've done all sorts of things. I'm Barabbas in the story. Or we might think, well, I'm too bad. The stuff I've done is too great. And going, no, like that minimizes the scope and power of Christ.
Yeah.
And the power and weight of his atonement on the cross. So as we get a bigger vision of Jesus, I think it both reveals, whoa, I'm worse than I thought I was, but I'm also more loved than I thought I was. And it's, I need that bigger, expansive view of vision of Christ and who he is. And I think when you get that, when that gets a hold of your heart,
I agree.
From the inside out.
I don't remember the first time I heard someone say there's nothing you could do to make Jesus love you more or make him love you less. And I think I still wrestle with that, with the truth of that, because it's like, really? Because I don't know. There's a lot of people that I've met in my life that didn't love me because of, what I did or didn't do. And so I think for us to get to that point and just to, how do we practically receive from Jesus everyday life, even when we're tired and discouraged, just how do we receive that from him? Because I think my picture of Jesus, he's always there with his hands out, with his arms open to us. But
Yes. Well,
we don't get there.
yeah. Well, one practice, I feel like there's a lot of maybe venues of prayer and scripture and spiritual practices, disciplines, and all. Like that's part of the goal there is receiving that. But one that my wife Holly and I love to use, it's a form of prayer called listening prayer, where there's kind of two movements. Where in the first part, when I'm struggling, when I'm feeling like something's really off inside, I have two questions. The first part will be, Jesus, what's the lie I'm believing or the fear I'm living under? And creating some space to just bring that before the Lord and try and listen and see if there's something that kind of surfaces in the heart or the mind. And the second movement will be, all right, Jesus, well, what's the truth that you want to speak into that? And often there will be some kind of truth from Scripture that will. So as an example of this, I had a few years ago, I had this morning where I woke up and it was like this voice was blaring in my head of, you're going to die soon. And I was like, that's weird. Where's that coming from? Like it was really loud. I'm like, God, is that you? But it was inciting kind of the spirit or whatever. I'm like, that doesn't sound like you. Like what's going on there? So I got up, I went for a walk, and I just, okay, God, I brought it forward. Like, is there a lie or a fear now? And what began to surface, I felt like Jesus began to bring clarity to me of like, I had just finished this kind of major project with the church, with ministry, with stuff I've been working on for a couple years. And I realized like the lie was God was just using you to get that done. And now that it's finished, he doesn't need you anymore.
Oh.
And realizing like, whoa, that's the enemy. That's not God. But like the lie from the enemy or the fear I was living under had to do with that.
Yeah.
And so I took some time to just bring it to the Lord and go, hey, well, what's the truth, Jesus, that you want to speak into that? And 30 seconds spent in prayer, and just had this strong, I felt like it was Jesus through his spirit just bringing conviction of, Josh, I didn't call you to use you, I called you to love you. Like before I called you to use you, I called you to love you. And it broke the weight of that kind of thing I woke up and was living under. And I found often in my life there can be some anxieties and everything. And I see a counselor. I love counseling. It's been really helpful in digging up some stuff in my story. I have a spiritual director that I occasionally contact who's been really helpful. And I believe, all those things can be helpful. When I hit the lowest point, was on medication for a season. That was really helpful. Mm-hmm. So for all those things, but also I think the spiritual element with Christ can dig down into some of the deepest layers where we can be living under lies from the enemy or fears that are not of God. And they almost like some of the other stuff I experienced at times can be even symptoms there. And I found, man, there's something powerful in through prayer, through scripture, through Christian community, like God's able to dredge up those things that are not of him and to redeem and restore through the gospel, through his spirit, through his people, just the truth of who he is.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And the truth. And you mentioned earlier when we were kind of talking, you said, why don't I can't remember exactly what I asked you, but you said the reason why we don't go there is because we have all these other things that we run to in our life. How do we, if somebody's listening, they're thinking, I don't quite get that. How do they cultivate a spiritual hunger in a world that there are so many distractions, and they kind of draw us away from him? So many of them, and not that all of them are bad. I mean, there's good things that can, draw you away from him just because it distracts us, And I think I've heard so many pastors or people say, one of the biggest things the enemy uses is distraction. And man, we live in a culture where it's everywhere all the time. So how do we help people get that spiritual hunger?
Yes, definitely. Well, I love, story that comes to mind, kind of start, story here is in John chapter 6, where Jesus refers to himself as the bread of life. And this is just after he has fed the 5,000 people out wilderness. And what's interesting is a lot of the imagery and things that Jesus is drawing on here is against the backdrop of the Old Testament, where Israel was wandering in the wilderness and they needed daily bread, like daily manna from heaven. And God provided manna for his people in the wilderness as daily sustenance to live on.
Yeah.
And the point, though, when you read in the Old Testament, and Jesus says this as well, is like God was teaching Israel to learn that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that proceeds from the mouth of God, in the language of Deuteronomy. And so the picture there is that Jesus, man, we need daily sustenance. That right now we're on our way, like Israel, we're on our way to the promised land. We're on our way to kingdom come. We're on our way to God's throne. We're not there yet. We still live in a broken, fallen world, and yet we need the sustenance of God, God's own life through his word, Christ, and scripture, and him encountering us there through his spirit, his presence and all. And I think one of the challenges is that the truth is we all have that hunger, that thirst. The challenge is we can run to other things to try and fill that and meet that. And like you said, it's not necessarily those things are bad. There are many, we can run to many good things. Like, God created food and relationships, and at times it's not that maybe the thing itself is bad, but we can have a distorted relationship with those things. I love the phrase, man, the devil doesn't have his own clay, right? He can't he can't create anything. He can only take the good things that God's created and corrupt them. And similarly, like we can begin to take things like food or romance or different relationships, and if we make them our ultimate thing, it's like we're trying to meet that deepest hunger in us by using. I experience this even in I see in couples. They need to do that with in marriage, for example. Like my wife years ago when we were dating, getting married. It's almost 20 years ago now, but she told her friend, Josh, I'm so glad Josh loves God more than me. And her friend was like, "That's crazy. You should be the most important thing to him." And she was like, like that's wrong. You get away from that guy, And she was like, "No, it's so freeing because she's like, I've been in these other relationships where it's like they wanted to make me their everything, and it was not good for them or for me. Like, you don't look at me to be your savior. You're looking to the wrong place to get those deepest places met." That doesn't mean my wife, that she was bad. It was that I had a distorted, or that, there could be a distorted relationship with something good, where you're trying to meet that deepest hunger in you through that person or that. I don't know, a lot of us like our phones, I'm constantly scrolling and whatever, just trying, I need to know what's going on in the world because I'm trying to meet some kind of hunger within me. And it's going, the hunger's not bad, but it was meant to drive you towards God, first and foremost.
Yeah.
And if you're getting that hunger nourished by his word, his spirit, then you're going to be able to have a healthier relationship on top of that with whether a spouse or friends or relationships or food or community or, or your phone or whatever the thing are when we're having those deepest hungers met by God, the source of substance that they were meant for. I think we're then able to enter into a healthier relationship with the rest of life.
Oh, I see it all the time because we want them to meet all those needs that God's supposed to meet, whether it's a spouse or whether it's whatever it is that we get into. Plus, like you said, that would have been unfair. I mean, your wife is so wise at that time to realize this frees me up. I don't have to be everything for him because he is letting God do that. And that's just a huge thing. I mean, we're not talking about marriage today, but I could just think how many marriages would not be in trouble if the expectation that this spouse is supposed to meet everything in my life that wasn't there. It's the line in the movie, "You complete me." But I think the first time I heard that, I wanted to scream. No, he can't. He doesn't. No, there's no way he can do that. I love the movie, but no, that's not right.
Yeah.
And then we sit and think, oh, that's so good, but no, it's because it's never going to happen.
Yes.
What about the other part of that where we try to do it all ourselves? We're just trying to if I can do it all myself, that lie I think
Yeah.
the enemy says, because I think the lie is that sure you can do that. You
Yeah.
don't really need God. You don't really, need all that.
Yeah.
And do you see that as one of the lies that we often believe, that we can do it all ourselves?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. One of the things I talk about early on in the book too is like, I think there's a dangerous way of hearing that phrase, God is on your side. That's not true. It does mean, man, the creator entering on our side of creation, Jesus coming to get us. But it doesn't mean he just endorses everything you do, because I think that we live in a culture that can often be kind of, you do you, just do whatever you want to do, be who you want to be. And that can often be this like, hey, I'm just going to be my own person, regardless of God's ways, God's character, God's everything, and just try and tack him on as an endorsement. Oh, he's on my side, he's endorsement, And the reality is it's not to say that God takes sides. I love there's I don't know, some people, it's not like God's taking sides in a fantasy football team or, and like even like conflicts between different, cultural tribes or things like that. But I think that, I love the story in Joshua where they get ready to go into the promised land, and Joshua sees this angel, the commander of the Lord's army on the field. He says, hey, are you for us or for our enemies? And the angel says, neither, I'm on God's side. And so there is this piece where there is an angle where we're called to be on God's side and align our lives with his kingdom and his ways and so on. But it is to say that even when Jesus confronts the sin in our lives and the things that are not as they should be, that are wrong in our lives, I love the theologian Karl Barth talked about how God's no is always embedded within his bigger yes, meaning God's no to our sin is embedded within his bigger yes to our humanity as he created it to be. And so even when Christ challenges you, his end game is to set you free. He's going to confront the things that are lesser. And so to your point, I think there's be this danger of being self-reliant. I'm just going to do life my own way, on my own terms, be my own person, do what I want to be. That's going to lead you to destruction, and God is on your side enough. He cares about you enough to not leave you to that direction without warning and confrontation and challenge. And yet when he confronts and challenges and addresses the sin in your life with truth, he does it with grace he's out to set you free.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we just don't listen. We don't hear that, and I think that, when we're talking to people in counseling, and as we backtrack, there were definitely signs where God was reaching out, where God was either speaking through their pastor or another person or a friend or their spouse, and they just kept ignoring it. Yeah. And it does. It will eventually take you down.
Yeah.
For sure.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what about we've talked a little about shame. I think seems like such a barrier, I think, for so many people in coming to Christ, where they feel like, I've been to church in 50 years or 30 years or 10 years. I just don't have the spiritual in me. How would you encourage them to come to Jesus, to come to him hungry, and to get past those things that I believe, like we've talked, that the enemy throws at us? Just, Jesus doesn't want you.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, I would say one of my encouragements would be, man, when you come to Jesus, that you are coming to the one who's already come to you, and meaning, one illustration of that is in John 7, where Jesus says, come to me all who are thirsty. Now, what Jesus is, it's interesting. John says, Jesus cried out, let all who are thirsty come to me and drink. Okay? And that phrase cried out, it's actually the word krazo in the original language, which is like the word of like a crow cawing out, like crying out. It's loud. Like Jesus is like, not like screaming angry, but like, whoa, like he is crying out. And he's crying out for you. Like, if you are thirsty, if you have hunger. You're if you are awakened to the deeper need and longing that you have, it's not that you got to go and get Jesus' attention. He's trying to get your attention. Like it's not that you got to go climb the sacred mountain and get to him. Like Jesus has descended, has come down the sacred mountain, so to speak. He has come from heaven to earth. He's gone to the cross. He's pursuing. The gospel is more about his pursuit of you than your pursuit of him. Mm-hmm. And so when you get that, like, it frees you to, I find coming to Jesus is like, it's coming to life. I love where it's like, man, where else would we go, Jesus? You alone have the words of life. Mm-hmm. Another thought that stands out is one theme that I focus on one of the things I loved when I revisited the Gospel of John, it feels like you can read it at surface level. You can just read it once as a new believer, and it's like, whoa, it was so powerful. But growing over the years and seeing more and more every time, I'm still like learning more, seeing so much more. And one of those is like how much Old Testament background there is. And so in the book, every chapter looks at a significant Old Testament backdrop that shines light on what's happening in the scene in John. So one of those, for example, is in John chapter 4 with the Samaritan woman at the well, where Jesus meets this woman at the well. And it's kind of a famous story. But one of the things that it's only been in recent years that I saw was actually the well is an Old Testament backdrop for where the groom meets his bride. Right? So in the well in the Old Testament, this is where Jacob met Rachel. This is where Isaac, like Rebecca, was found for Isaac. This is where Moses met Zipporah, was at the well. And so there's actually a famous Jewish scholar, kind of a leading Jewish scholar named Robert Alter, who talks about the well as an Old Testament type scene, kind of a motif in the Hebrew Bible. This is where the groom and the bride first encounter one another. And he walks through kind of 5 elements that are common throughout this picture. Mm-hmm. And we see all 5 of those in John chapter 4, where Jesus travels from a foreign land. He comes, he's thirsty, asks for water. There's this encounter at the well, and then they go and have a celebration with people. Now, what that's not saying, it's not saying that Jesus is literally getting romantic with the woman at the well, right? Like there's nothing kind of on a horizontal level, which is a humanity level, like romantic on a level. But on a vertical level, I think John is depicting this as like an encounter between Christ and his church. Like it actually, yes, they're meeting individually, but it's representing something much bigger, which is us as the people of God, that we are like the bride of Christ encountering Christ come to be united with us in life with us forever. And one of the things that Jesus does in this encounter with the Samaritan woman is he draws out her thirst. He says, hey, go get your husband. And she's like, I don't have one. He's like, oh, yeah, you've had 5, and the person you're with now is not your husband. He's highlighting her thirst. He's awakening within her the reality of, man, she's had all these things in her life that have let her down, that have not been fulfilled. But I kind of argue for a variety of reasons in the book that I think it's interesting that there were these 6 people that she's been with in the past, but now Jesus is the 7th husband, so to speak. He's number 7. He's the one who brings that hunger, that thirst, that longing to completion, is the God of the universe who has come to meet us in our thirst and to
that's so
unite us into life with himself. And that, I think when we get that picture, it's like, oh man, I want to come to Jesus because that's where life is found. This is where God has come to me.
Yeah, it's I love the story too, because she was getting water, right? I mean, and she was coming at a time when the other women weren't there because of the life she had lived. And then Jesus is just, and I think that's such a story for us, that Jesus shows up in the middle of wherever we are, our brokenness. Yeah. And I would have just loved to be there when he said, you've had 5 husbands, and the one you're with now isn't your husband. Just to look on her face of, man, who is this guy?
Yeah.
And he wasn't condemning her. He was just saying, this is what you've been searching, and this is what you need. And I think that's just a story for us, whether we've been, our failures, like the hard time you went through, depression, that we always know, where have we been? I mean, Peter's story of failure restoration, and Jesus meets us right in where we are in that. Our regrets are, Peter's probably always one of my favorites, and I think he is for a lot of people, because we can identify with him, because, oh my gosh, I would do probably a lot of things he did, but for him, when the restoration came, was so powerful. And then, of course, we know what he did after that, as he spread the gospel around the world. So what do we learn from Peter, I guess, in that situation?
Yeah, I love John chapter 21, Jesus' restoration of Peter. This is so fascinating to me, because there's, I believe Jesus is intentionally walking Peter back through key moments from his life to restore him. So this is, so as the scene opens, Jesus is alive, but Peter and the disciples are out fishing on the boat, and they've been working all night, and they've caught nothing. And then Jesus shows up, and he's like, "Hey, throw your nets on the other side." And they do, and they have this miraculous catch, like 153 fish. And what's interesting is, if you go back to the gospel, if you go back earlier in Peter's life, this is the same way that Jesus initially called him to be his disciple. When Jesus first called him, it was the same thing. They'd been fishing, hadn't caught anything. He just says, "Throw the nets out and you'll catch them." And I think of it like, I recently was down in my hometown where I grew up as a kid, and we happened to pull up in front of the house that I grew up in. And the owners were out front. I had my kids with me. I was like, "Hey, I grew up here," and da da da. They're like, "Hey, do you want to come inside?" I was like, "Oh yeah." So I got to take my kids into my childhood home. And as I was walking through these different rooms, it was like nostalgia was kicking. I'm like, "Whoa, I remember when we snuck out at night and TP'd the neighbor's house over there. I remember we used to, spaghetti and whatever here, my mom's favorite meals. And this was where this happened. This is where we jumped off the porch onto this thing that we made." And, and like all these memories that come out. I think Jesus is like, he's walking in John 21. He's walking Peter back through these memories. First, through the memory of when he was first called to become a fisher of men.
Sure.
Which now Jesus is restoring that calling in John 21. Peter thinks he blew it because he abandoned Jesus in his dark. He denied him at the cross, And then the next image is Jesus lights a charcoal fire. And earlier in John's gospel, that charcoal fire, he cooks breakfast for the disciples. But earlier in John's gospel, it was around a charcoal fire that Peter denied Jesus, where it was the night Jesus was being crucified. And you can think of like the smell of that charcoal fire, like going into Peter's nostrils. It's awakening the memory of what he did to Jesus, And yet Jesus is walking him through that in order to forgive him. And ultimately in the scene, Jesus is restoring Peter's calling. It's interesting. Two details that are really fascinating is when they have the catch of fish in John 21, they catch 153 fish, and it says the nets were not torn. Well, why does it say the nets were not torn? What's the significance there? Well, when you go back to when Jesus first called Peter, they had this massive catch of fish, but the nets couldn't hold it. The nets were tearing, were breaking, the boats were sinking. It was too much. And the way I see what's happening is like Jesus' calling on Peter's life is ultimately to lead the church in this evangelistic calling to bring in the nations to be a fisher of men. And it's about to be Pentecost, where the nations are going to be gathered in God's people, Gentiles. And when Jesus first called Peter, he wasn't ready for that miraculous catch. He wasn't ready for the ingathering of the nations. They had to go through 3 years of formation, discipleship, and all that, and even his own failures. And yet Jesus' faithfulness to Peter, even when Peter was unfaithful to Jesus, he's bringing him through all that to bring him now into this calling where, dude, Peter, you're going to lead the evangelistic mission of the church. It's going to bring in the gathering of the nations. It's going to be a miraculous catch, and the nets of the church will hold. They'll now be able to hold what's coming. The 153 fish, there's only one other place the number 153 shows up in the Bible. You go back in the Old Testament, and I can't remember the name. It's in Kings, First Kings. I can't remember the number offhand, but it's the number of King Solomon in the heyday of Israel's kingdom. He has a census to go, how many Gentiles are in the land? And it's 153,000 and something, right? Which is like this echo of like the Gentiles, the ingathering of the Gentiles into the people of God. It's this echo now in his miraculous catch of fish. What's the big picture there, right? The big picture with Peter is like, Peter thinks he's blown it, and yet Christ is faithful to him, even when he's been unfaithful. And Jesus walks him back through memories of his initial calling and of his failure to restore him back to those things. And I found in my own life, and I know for our lives, like Jesus will often walk you back through earlier parts of your story that maybe you just want to move on from, get away from, just kind of scratch out, whatever. But Jesus cares about your whole story, like both the gifts and talents he's given you, like that early calling Peter had, and the failures and mistakes and regrets you've made, like that charcoal fire. And yet he comes after, he brings you back. And for me, part of it's even going through counseling and different things to go back into those deeper places. Let Jesus guide me into those deeper places of my story in order to redeem them, because he cares about the whole you and your whole story that you're bringing to the table. And he walks you back gently into those places in order to redeem and restore and bring you into a fuller sense of the calling that he has for you in the season you're in now.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And just to know the truth in that is so good. So I've heard John 3:16, probably, I think it was the first verse I ever memorized. You see it held up at football games. I mean, it's everywhere. But when you really think about it, that Jesus had to die so we could be free, how do we embrace that? And then how does that change us and change how we see ourselves with God? Because there's so much power in those few words.
Yes. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, whosoever should believe in him have life everlasting. And I love the next verse that tags right onto that. Here's a thought. How do we receive that? Step into that. I would say coming to Jesus in the light rather than trying to hide who you are in the dark. Bringing yourself vulnerably before him in the light rather than hiding who you are in the dark. Because in context, John 3:16, it's essentially a sandwich in between these stories of Nicodemus and the woman at the well. And what's interesting is Nicodemus comes to Jesus in the dark, kind of hiding, secrecy. He's not ready yet. He's kind of testing out Jesus, where he's at. And Nicodemus is one of the religious leaders of the day. And so he's like the person you think he's got it all figured out, people got, but he's actually confused. And he comes, he's trying to figure out, but he's coming in the dark at night. In John 3:16, right afterwards, 17 talks about those who love darkness rather than light, the deeds are evil. And so I think Nicodemus is representing kind of a number of, is representing someone who maybe seems on the outside looking in like they've got it all together, but really they're hiding stuff. They've got their stuff in the darkness that they're not ready to bring before Jesus as they are yet. And then you go to the story just after John 3:16 in John chapter 4 with the woman at the well, and Jesus encounters her in the day at noon. Yeah. It's daylight, it's light out. And for John, that's intentional. Like Nicodemus at night, Nick at night, and they got the woman at the well during the day. And the woman at the well during the day, all her stuff comes out on the table. Like her 5 husbands, like her history, her wounds, her pain, her sin, her mess, her past. Like it all comes out vulnerably before Jesus, and it leads to great joy. She runs back, come everybody, meet this person who's transformed my life. And so I think John 3:16 is like this invitation right in between those two stories that's going, don't live in the dark, keeping your stuff hidden, trying to just navigate life on your own and figure it all out, like on your own. Rather, come before Christ vulnerably and bring who you are and where you're at. Bring it all for him into the light, because that's where true freedom is from. God already loves you. Jesus is the light of the world who's entered onto your side, who's moving towards you to actually You don't have to go find the light switch and turn on. Jesus is the light of the world who's coming for you. You and I, you just have to step out of the shadows.
Yeah.
The call to us is to come out of hiding, to no longer kind of hide the parts of us that we're afraid of being exposed, but to actually willingly bring those before Christ and allow his light to shine on those, to shine on us, where we can bring out the stuff that we wanted to hide and allow him to begin restoring and making us his own.
Yeah, and we need to hear that, because I think so many people don't want it to come out. But then when you see the stories we've talked about with Peter and Nicodemus and the woman at the well, if God leads us to put that out there, which he does, he's not going to throw it back in our face. He's gonna redeem it. He's gonna teach us through it, and we're gonna be better off on the other side of that. And I think sometimes we hold back. I thought one time, I remember the first time I realized that I couldn't hide anything from God. It was such a revelation. I was a teenager. It's like, he knows what I'm thinking. He knows. It's just like, it's all there anyway. So why not get it out there? Like that. There's so many, there's so many good things in that book, so many things we've talked about today. So kind of as we get close to closing, if you could give people one truth from the book that you hope shapes their relationship with Jesus, what would it be?
Yeah. Man, it would be that God is on your side, particularly when it most feels like life is against you, like when it seems like everything seems against you, that Jesus is actually for you. And one of the things I love, the thing maybe I'll leave us with is, I think one of the things John leaves us with, I love how he refers to himself throughout the gospel as the disciple whom Jesus loved, the beloved disciple. And, I had a friend ask me back in the day, hey, Josh, when you die, what do you want on your tombstone? I was kind of like, that's sort of a morbid question, man. What do you guys do? It's like, hey, legacy, or what do you hope is most remembered about you? And I remember I was kind of a newer believer, but I've been reading the Gospel of John. I'm like, I think it would be a disciple whom Jesus loved, and beloved. And I think that John, the author of this gospel, like what he took away, like he's essentially writing on his tombstone, the way that he's going to be remembered for generations, 2,000 years later, is a disciple whom Jesus loved. That was the most important thing he wanted to look at in terms of who he was in light of Jesus. It wasn't about his accomplishments. It wasn't about his mistakes. It wasn't about whatever. It was that he was loved by Jesus. And that phrase, beloved, that's actually really it's a powerful phrase, because you look at places in Scripture like King David. His name in Hebrew actually means beloved. David is the Hebrew word for beloved. And so whenever Israel was celebrating the most epic king in their history, King David, they were saying King beloved, King beloved, King beloved. His identity was not about his love for God, it was God's love for him. When Jesus came up out of the waters of baptism, he hears the voice of the Father. Everyone around hears the voice of the Father saying, this is my Son whom I love. Jesus is the eternal beloved of the Father. That's his deepest core identity. Before he's done anything, before he started his ministry, he gets baptized, before he's done the miracles or done the healings, done the preaching, done any of that, before any of that, Jesus is declared to be the beloved of the Father. And the Song of Songs, the representation for God's people, it's the beloved, the lover, and the beloved. And that's who we are. And so all that to say, I think John's biggest takeaway he wants to leave us with of who he is in light of Jesus is that he is the beloved of God. And that would be my biggest hope and takeaway is that, for readers, those who step into it, that they would come out the other side seen in technicolor from all these different angles throughout the biblical story and in their own life, and in our wounds and our regrets and our failures and our mistakes and our successes and our accomplishments, all that kind of gives way to the deepest thing. The deepest thing about us would be those who are loved by God.
So good. I remember, I'll confess, the time when I thought, John's kind of arrogant. He's talking about he's the one who Jesus loved. And then as you've talked, it's like, no, he got it. He got it. He didn't have to do
He-
anything else. He was loved by Jesus. And there's so much power in that. I mean, just if we can just ask God to build that into us, I guess, because I think it's hard. It's hard to believe. It's almost like it's too good to be true, but it's true. That saying with it, because it's we don't experience that from anybody else. No matter how much my wife loves me and I love her, we still let each other down. We're not perfect with each other. She still tells me how to drive. I still tell her how to load the dishwasher, and she doesn't listen to me. I mean, nobody's going to love us unconditionally like that. So this book, you came out of a tough time. How's it changed you? How's it changed your relationship with Jesus?
Definitely. It's deepened my conviction that, it's interesting because, like I said, counseling, spiritual direction, all these things have been extremely helpful. And beneath all of that, at a bedrock level, I've encountered God ministering to me through his word and through his spirit. And so God has used the Gospel of John to give me a bedrock foundation of conviction that, man, he is really for me at a more foundational, phenomenal level than I ever could have dreamed. Even more so. He's more on my side than I could have dreamed. And where I kind of go in the book, it was like, on one hand, it's on John, but on the other hand, it's through the lens of the Gospel of John, seeing glimpses of all, like the whole Old Testament, the whole biblical story pointing to Christ as its fulfillment. Like every chapter, like one of the funnest things for me on the kind of Bible nerd side was like digging into the Old Testament imagery and backgrounds behind these scenes in John. And that's just given me, like, God ministered to my heart at this foundational level through his word, that he's more for me than I ever dared dream.
Yeah. It's so good. It's so good. Yeah, it's just that truth. And I think, when we first started, you said, John's the kind of the book that if somebody says, where do we start? Well, a lot of times they'll tell them John. And you read through it the first time, and so many people have come to Christ through that, or it's just kind of solidified. But the way you have taken it and dug deep in it and see how that really can affect us on a deeper level, I love that. I mean, I think so much truth in that. So powerful.
Yeah, I co-lead a high school Bible study at our church, and there's about 15 high schoolers in there. And this morning we had our 7 a.m. this morning we were meeting, and we've been working through different books of the Bible. We're currently in the Gospel of John, actually, and the students were drawing us. I'm like, oh, I'd never seen that before. And they were even still like, new. I just finished a book on this, and I'm still like learning. There's so many layers of depth and richness.
We never will completely get it, because I think that's such the power of the gospel and the Bible, is that it meets us where we are today, just like it met you in the middle of the crisis, and it meets you today on this side of the crisis. And there's just because it's God's word, I guess that's the bottom line. So, Book of John, what's your scripture that is anchoring you today?
My theme verse for a while now has been it's in Job, where Job says, "Though he slay me, yet I will trust him."
Yeah.
And so, man, I want to live with that foundational level of trust, where, in the book, I share a variety of stories from other years. I shared earlier, just recent, but in the book, I talk about, like, man, when our 5-year-old daughter, this is a decade ago, where we thought we lost her. It's 6 months with specialists, and thought we had lost her. When I went blind in my right eye, and the doctors thought I was going blind. And last, a few years ago, when we went through the really brutal season, like, man, just really try to open this. A friend said, "Hey, this is your most raw, vulnerable book," and really sharing from some of the darkest parts of my own life and challenging parts of my own story. And yet within that, without providing cliche, simplistic answers, I have found God encountering me and cultivating a deeper trust. And so that's been the verse that's been like the theme verse has just been, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. I want to live with
I love that. I just finished Job as we're reading through the Bible. The one we're using this year is one the Bible Project did, so we kind of bounce around.
Yes.
But yeah, Job is a powerful book. I got more out of it this time than I think I ever have. And maybe I just listened better to the things like you were saying, what Job says. But it's just amazing how God continues to, I've read that before, but I didn't get that before. I didn't hear that before. And now I needed that, and I hear it today. So that's really cool. So the book is How God is For You When All Seems Against You, Rich Lessons from the Life of Jesus.
Or close up. It sounds like maybe that got mistyped with the notes ago, but yes. So it's it's called God is on Your Side. How Jesus is for you when everything seems against you.
Yeah, it was typed wrong. I don't know why. I'm sorry. I'm glad you
no worries at all. No worries at all.
Okay.
All good.
And obviously it's available everywhere. And so if people want to find you, where's the best places to find you?
Excellent. Yeah. So online, I have a website. It's just my full name, JoshuaRyanButler.com. And then I'm on social media, mostly Instagram is probably where I spend the most time. And it's Josh Butler PDX out there. Yeah.
That's great. I love what you do. I think this is a powerful book. I've certainly just enjoyed learning more and just challenging. We've talked, just all the things that keep me from daily receiving that, and I want to get more of that stuff out of my life and more of what you're talking about into my life. So I thank you for that.
Well, thank you so much. Well, I so appreciate your ministry, Dr. Kim, and just you hearing the chance for the conversation. Yeah.
Thanks. Well, I love our friendship, and I love that we can connect this way. Thanks again.
Definitely. Thank you.
Well, join me next Tuesday on the podcast when I'll be talking about our marriage is struggling. My spouse thinks everything's fine. And then on Wider Lens next week, Jonathan Seidel. He is the author of Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic. We'll see you next week.